are in Ecclesiastes. We made it through chapter 1. This is supposed to be a very depressing, or written from a state of depression kind of, but I'm not sure that it necessarily is, as much as it is the wisdom of having tested all of these things. To the point that I even wonder if he didn't just investigate some of it in an observation type of way, although some of it we can see that he did definitely experience and put himself through. And so maybe he did in all of these things do everything that he's talking about, but he's tried to. I don't know. A lot of the commentaries that I read keep calling these experiments that he did, and so he's done these experiments, if you want to look at it that way, to see if there's any satisfaction really apart from God in anything. You know, people want to, they want to think that there is, they want to act like there is, but we know when we talk to people, whatever they're successful in, even if it's even if it's not something good, there's rarely any satisfaction in anything. And there's going to be a statement in chapter 2 today that kind of drives that home, I think. But, I mean, the conclusion, really, this is really an easy book to overview and be done with in about 15 minutes if you know the book, if you've read it, more than once, read through it and thought about the things that are in here and what he's trying to say. We could have just done an overview of the whole book last week and just been done and moved on. But it really is, I think, I don't know. I think people make a lot of conclusions as to when and why he wrote the book. And I'm not sure that they're all right. And I think that's why they keep coming back to this. He was depressed, or he wrote it from a state of depression. And really, I think it, the same commentaries that say that will say that he was doing experiments with all this stuff. And so either he's experimenting to investigate to try to find out if there is any satisfaction, or to prove that there's not. And that's really what I think, so far, that's my opinion of it, is that he was doing these things to prove that there is no satisfaction in anything under the sun. Nothing, if you don't contemplate, you don't think about anything above this planet, it's just day to day, day in, day out, then yeah, it's all worthless and vain, and vanity literally means trying to catch the wind or try to hold the wind. There's a whole lot of effort there to achieve nothing, really, in the grand scheme of things. So anyways, I don't want to start rambling right out of the gate, but so let's just get on with it. It says, I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with mirth, therefore enjoy pleasure, but surely this also is vanity. Mirth means gladness or pleasure. He says, well, therefore enjoy pleasure. So this is just anything entertaining, anything that you might think you would do to make you happy. What is the joy in that, right? And he said this is vanity. He said, verse 2 says, I said of laughter, madness, and of mirth, what does it accomplish? So what does just laughing all the time, just enjoying pleasure all the time, anything that makes you feel good, and we had that saying in the past, if it feels good, do it. Anything like that, what kind of satisfaction are you going to get? You know, it doesn't, none of the stuff that he talks about gives you hope for anything, right? Everything is done when the experiment or the experience or the task, when it's accomplished, it's just done. And you have to find something else beyond that. Otherwise, it's just done. And I think I mentioned this last week. I think this is why suicide in general, but especially among atheists or anybody else who would just think that you put it all into this life, there's nothing beyond this. Once you've achieved everything you can possibly think of achieving, it's just done. And you think about, I mean, we can probably think of a couple of comedians when he says, I said of laughter, madness, like it doesn't matter, right? You just, eventually just becomes insanity, or it just becomes meaningless itself. I've often wondered about comedians, how they can do the same routine night after night and make it funny. For them, it can't be funny anymore. So they literally have to act like it still is. To do it over and over and over again. This is your routine for a year that you do at every club you go to or every appearance you go to. How is it still funny to you? How do you still portray it as being funny? You know, it doesn't make sense to live in that kind of a moment for very long. And you know, there have been comedians, many entertainers that have just committed suicide. You think because they're laughing all the time and their whole job is to make you laugh or make you smile, that's where they live all the time, only to find out their life was a wreck, or they had no hope, or nothing had any meaning, any real meaning to them. Verse 3, I searched my heart how to gratify my flesh with wine. I searched in my heart how to gratify my flesh with wine, while guiding my heart with wisdom. Now, those two don't go very well together. to gratify your flesh, in other words, to overindulge and drink to the point where you feel good, right? You're numb, you don't really feel anything, you might laugh at anything, whatever. You get to that point. It doesn't go well with wisdom. You know, you never hear anybody wake up from a drunk experience and say, wow, I'm glad. Look at the great decisions I made while I was doing that. That doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. And at the end of Proverbs, his mother warned him to stay away from alcohol. Just stay away from it. So to do this experiment, to accomplish that, he has to ignore the advice of his own mother. Verse 3 there. So I searched in my heart how to gratify my flesh with wine, while guiding my heart with wisdom, and how to lay hold of folly, till I might see what is good for the sons of men to do under heaven all the days of their life. And so, not just to experience being a drunk. Basically, he's just going to be a party guy all the time, all his life. He wants to be a sorority brother the rest of his life, right? I mean, that's kind of the mentality. So I don't even think it's just about overindulging in alcohol. He wants to see if he can overindulge in alcohol like they do and still be smart, right? Still make good decisions. There was more to this, if it's truly an experiment, than just experiencing the drunk. So he did that. How to lay hold of folly or foolishness, until I might see what is good for the sons of men to do under heaven all the days of their lives. So he knows people, or he's seen people who are just in this state all their life. If you're on social media anymore, but if you were ever on social media, and you have friends from back in the day when you were young and like this, And it's surprising the number of people from back in my school days that are still trying to be this. And they're still trying to hang on to it. You know? And I think, look in the mirror, man. It's not going well for you. But who knows? So he's trying to experience that. Why do they think this is good? To do this all their lives, all the days, all their lives. I think about every day at about 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon when I start feeling like I'm ready for a nap. Like, how did I do this when I was young? How did I go on 3 hours of sleep doing this? Might be up partying, 3 hours of sleep, and then get up and go to work and work all day. How did I do that? Except for that I was young and hadn't completely abused my body yet. Now I wish I hadn't done that. Maybe I would be in a little better shape than I am now. But again, you shift gears from as you're maturing. You don't just stay in that party mode all the time. Now he's moving into the experiment of life, really, being a real adult, a responsible adult, maybe. So he said, but notice the word I in this section, speaking of himself, the word I, my, myself, is just repeated over and over again in here. It says, I made my work great. I built my houses. I planted myself vineyards. Or I built myself houses. I planted myself vineyards. I made myself gardens and orchards, and I planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made myself water pools from which to water the growing trees of the grove. I acquired male and female servants and had servants born in my house. Yes, I had greater possessions of herds and flocks than all who were in Jerusalem before me. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the special treasures of kings and of provinces. I acquired male and female singers, the delights of the sons of men, the musical instruments of all kinds. So I became great and excelled more than all who were before me in Jerusalem. My wisdom remained with me. Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my reward from all my labor. Then I looked on all the works that my hands had done, and on the labor in which I had toiled, and indeed all was vanity and grasping for the wind. There was no profit under the sun. All right, so he shifts into that kind of adult mode. He's going to work now. And he puts everything into it. He's not a lazy person, that's for sure. He's going to do these things, but he's doing it. So the idea here is I'm trying to do this without God. And he's going to do more than anybody, build bigger than anybody. And he said, I made my works great. So he didn't just take on small jobs, he took on big jobs. And one of the places in 1 Kings or 2 Chronicles that talks about Solomon, it talks about the number of servants that he had. And he had different groups, and each group was tens of thousands of people. And he had 3,000 foremen to run his jobs for him. All this stuff going on at one time, and he's managing then 3,000 foremen at the very least. That's just in the building projects. So he wasn't building houses like, a little 2-bedroom, 1.5 bath, down the road. He's building mansions. He's building castles. He's building major building projects. And he's running it all. Right? So he said, I made my works great. So on purpose, he made them hard. He made them large. I built myself houses. There you go. I planted myself vineyards. So he's into agriculture on top of it. So not just housing, not just, huge landmarks, but agriculture on top of it. So he built vineyards. So he didn't just grow grapes, though, likely, right? He probably had his own vintage, his own wines that I'm sure were perfect. In all that, he understood all of that. He said, I made myself gardens and orchards, and I planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. Now, again, there's another section of Scripture in where it talks about Solomon's life in Kings and Chronicles that talk about the daily provision for his closest, right, for his court. And it seems like his court was like 14,000 people. And he fed them every day. And it lists off all of the deer, all of the cattle, all the lambs. It's an insane amount of food daily that he provided for these people, for his family and for his court. It's an insane amount. So when we read these, that he planted vineyards, he planted fruit trees, you got to imagine these are huge. These are huge plots of land. This isn't, like my 8 failed apple trees that I planted in my backyard. That's not what he did. He didn't have a little hobby farm just to see if he could do it. He had massive, massive things. So I made myself gardens and orchards, and I planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made myself water pools from which to water the growing trees of the grove. So I'm sure he's got cisterns, he's got ponds, he's got things that he's built into the land to catch water and retain water from probably streams and whatnot. I acquired male and female servants and had servants born in my house. Yes, I had greater possessions of herds and flocks than all of those who were in Jerusalem before me. So bigger flocks, bigger herds than anybody who even came before me in Jerusalem. And then servants. He acquired the male servants and the female servants, but then even they prospered and multiplied under him to the point where they were he didn't have to go and buy any more servants or female servants. He didn't have to go and acquire. They were being born right in his house. Okay? So his servants were multiplying even, which means, that implies, I think, he took pretty good care of them. Right? You don't have your workforce growing in your own within your workforce if you're not taking care of them. If you're not feeding them well and keeping them strong and whatever. So he's able to provide for all of that and do all of this, and everything everything he touches, we would say today, everything he touches is turned into gold, right? Everything's multiplying, everything's good, everything's healthy, the flocks, the servants, all of that. He said, I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the special treasures of kings and of the provinces. So in fact, I think I mentioned this last week, Solomon had gathered so much gold into his kingdom that silver was basically worthless. It was like stones, it says. So to have that much and then still acquiring treasures, so he's so wealthy, he can go to a king and say, hey, I like what you have here, let me buy that and bring it back. So whatever they might consider valuable and treasure, something maybe they even would say to anybody else, yeah, you can't. You can't touch this. There's no price that you could pay to buy this from me. He could go and say, I'll buy it from you. I'll take it. It's funny, I just watched a little clip, and evidently, I don't even know why it came up it's not anything that I researched or anything, but it was this guy who interviews entrepreneurs. And it was Shaquille O'Neal. I'm thinking, basketball stuff now. And he made a lot of money playing basketball, and endorsements, probably made more money in endorsements than he did playing basketball. Michael Jordan was the same way. So they're good businessmen, but I didn't realize you don't really understand how extravagant of a lifestyle these guys live. They give you little glimpses on these shows or whatever where they might show the lifestyle of one of them every once in a while, and you see the cars, you see the mansions, whatever. He was talking about when he was traded, and it was the only trade that I know of with him was from Miami to L.A. And it happened like in the middle of the season, or the season was already going. So it's not like it happened in the off season. He would go out and buy a house or find a house where him up. They had to get him an apartment, you know, and of course an apartment for Shaquille O'Neal is not, you know, a 2-bedroom apartment, you know, just hang on till you find a house kind of thing. This is big, nice condo, penthouse, whatever it was. But it didn't have anything in it. Well, it wasn't furnished at all in it. So he said, okay, this isn't going to do, right? So he goes down, said he went to Walmart. Now, I don't know if he went to Walmart, but so he went to Walmart and he goes in there. He's just like, yeah. He said, there was no TVs in there. So I went and bought 5 of the biggest TVs they had. And he just went through the store and he's like, get that, get that, get that, get that. He just, whatever, nothing fazed him. He could have probably bought out the inventory of the store and not even batted an eye at it, you know. Just went in and did it. That's kind of what you see here. He has that kind of, Solomon has that kind of pull to be able, but way more than Shaquille O'Neal had. Or has. And whatever he's doing for business dealings now, and it sounds like he still does and buys businesses and sells businesses and whatever. But whatever he has, first of all, he doesn't even register, as far as I know, in the top 10 most wealthy people in the world. He's way more wealthy than I can imagine ever being, but he's not sitting up there with Elon Musk, who's, I think, one of, if not the richest man in the world right now. But even him, even Elon Musk, his wealth couldn't have touched Solomon's wealth. You know, his wealth isn't going to shift the economy of the known world to him. But, you know, again, they've mentioned that, or I mentioned yet last week, that copper scroll that they have, if they could decipher it, figure it all out, figure out where supposedly Solomon hid most of his wealth, that it could shift the world's economy to Israel if Israel could find it. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of wealth. So you can go into a king's palace and see what he treasures, what he values most, and he thinks nobody else could touch. Solomon could make him an offer on something and say, hey, I'll buy that for whatever. Make it a price that he couldn't refuse, and end up with the valuable things of, like it says here, the kings and the princes of the provinces. He could end up with all that, and he was able to buy that kind of stuff. And so buying that, but still seeing no value in it. It might be exciting at the deal end of it while you're making the deal, but then to have it and take it home, and what are you going to do with it? Especially when you have multiple palaces all throughout your own kingdom. And, you know, can you imagine? Here, give this to your servant. Go find a shelf to put it on for me. You know, no real, he just bought these things to prove that he could. And really, if he took most of his wealth and hid it in a hole in the ground somewhere, you know, he's not even taking in the beauty of anything that he bought. He's not taking in the craftsmanship of it. It didn't really mean anything to him. He just did it because he could. So the special treasures, he said, I acquired male and female singers. So entertainment. And the word acquired there, I looked it up, and it really, he was like the producer of these. So think of an entertainer, producer, or agent who promotes and puts together these shows or whatever. He did that. It's not like he just bought a singer that he liked to hear and say, here's some money. You go sit in my palace in my court and just, you know, it's your turn on Thursdays or whatever. It's not just that. He created shows for these people to put on. He produced what they needed to do to be entertainment for all of his court, to be entertainment for everybody around him. So he acquired male and female singers, so the entertainers, and the delights of the sons of men, and musical instruments of all kind. The NIV there, instead of musical instruments, puts harems. So you look up the word, and it could mean women that he acquired. So think about, again, maybe Las Vegas shows or whatever. You have the actual act, and then you have all the women that are around that to catch the eye and everything else on top of it. So he was putting on Vegas shows, basically, in all of that. So I became great. Again, if you go back, I underlined all the times that I see the word I, myself, or my, and even right here in verse 9. So I became great and excelled more than all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. So even though he's doing all these experiments and he's trying to prove that, or he's really, I think, trying to prove that you can't find any satisfaction in anything without God, God didn't take his wisdom away from Solomon. He had given him that. He asked Solomon, what do you want? Ask me whatever you want, and I'm going to give it to you. He says, I need wisdom to be able to lead your people and all that. And God says, hey, you could have asked for wealth. You could have asked, for me to defeat your enemies, anything like that. He said, but you asked for the good thing, and now I'm going to give you all the other stuff, right? The wealth and the peace that you could have asked for. God doesn't take that away from Solomon. The wisdom that he gave Solomon, the capacity for it, even though he's going through all of these things. And you might, and listen, Solomon doesn't do very much right as well. We go back and we find that he multiplied horses from Egypt, which was against the law for the king. He multiplied wives, which he wasn't supposed to do. 700 wives and 300 concubines. That is insane. So he built temples for his wives to be able to worship their gods, his foreign wives that he wasn't supposed to marry, to worship their gods in his land, and he participated in the worship. So, in all of that, God still didn't take his wisdom, his ability to actually be smart and know how to apply things. He didn't take that away from him. From time to time, I'll hear somebody try to guilt somebody else into doing something. It usually happens with musicians in the church, and they find out somebody else but doesn't play or sing or whatever, and they'll tell them, hey, God gave you a talent, you better use it or he's going to take it away from you. And I know what they have in mind. They have in mind the parable that Jesus told of the servants with the talents, and he gives one so many, he gives one a little less, and one just one talent, and the two invest the money and have gain and whatever, and so he rewards them, the master does, and then when he gets down to the one with just one, he says, well, here's your talent back, I took it and I buried it, and and he says to the guy, or to his other servants, take his talent, give it to the one that had more, and take this guy and throw him out. Because, you wicked servant, you should have known. You know what I expected, but you didn't do it. And so I know that that's what they have in the back of their mind. You use your talent that God's given you to do this, or he's going to take it away from you. And I'm like, especially when you're using that an older person to a younger person. And that's usually where it comes off. Somebody who's been in the church longer, and honestly, when you start, rather than encouraging them, say, hey, you better use this or you're going to lose it, you might want to go read the letter to the Ephesians in Revelation. Are you using yours just because you have one, or do you really love the Lord? And, let this younger guy disciple him. Don't disciple him or her even in their musical talent. Disciple them in the Lord. That's not discipling them to try to guilt them into getting up and doing something with what they've been given. That's not discipling them. That's just a threat that God hasn't even issued to them. Somebody young in the Lord needs to be discipled. And sometimes I think some of those people who are young in the Lord or young even in age who are like hesitant to get up and use a talent in front of everybody, whatever it may be, maybe have a little more wisdom in holding back and saying, you know what, I need to figure out how to live life. So maybe you ought to, really what they're asking for is to be discipled in life rather than in just using the talent. I mean, I will always encourage him, like Nick's a pretty good guitar player. I always encourage him to try to, get him to use his talent to get up and be with the worship team, and Dave would too. But I don't think I ever told him, I said, dude, you better use that or God's going to take it away from you. I'm like, use it and listen to the other things that I say so you don't get pulled away from the world and use it in a way that you shouldn't. I don't know that God would take it away from him just because he's not using it in church. There are many people that God has enabled to be talented, highly talented musicians who aren't serving the Lord. God take their talent away from them? I mean, he's given them an extraordinary talent to show him and probably to inspire them to look for him, and instead they're going with the world. So that, I don't even know how I got on this now. Have to back up here. But just, listen, if you're ever in that spot, don't throw that kind of a guilt trip. That doesn't do anything to inspire a young person to be involved. It's more, find something where you can say, hey, you know what, whatever. Come and help us do this, or come and help us, where they're going to be alongside, have a chance for fellowship and learn how to serve the Lord. Come to the men's Bible study. We start pushing their talents, their especially music. I'm just stuck on music right now because I can't think of anything else off the top of my head, but start on that and think, I'm not coming to a men's Bible study. They might want me to lead worship because nobody else is there or something. I'm not going to do that to somebody. Now, in fact, when somebody wants to be involved with something here, it's a 6-month sit and wait and make sure you're supposed to be here to begin with. Right? I don't care if you know how to play the guitar. I don't care if you know how to play the guitar better than everybody else in the county. You just sit and wait before you do anything. So, anyways, now I'm getting off on my own thing, but I guess my point is, Solomon, God gave him that gift of wisdom, of wisdom more than anybody else. And he didn't take it away from him just because he was doing these experiments or because he messed up with the wives and the horses and the temples and all that. He didn't take it away from him. That would be forever, especially wisdom with a man able to use wisdom. That would be a testimony of what God, that would be a reminder of what God did for you the whole time you were involved in the things you weren't supposed to be involved in. Right? It would be a reminder. You still have your wits about you. You're still able to be wise. Well, why are you able to be wise, Solomon? Why are you able to have more wisdom than anybody else? Why are you able to accomplish all these great feats? Oh, yeah, because God made me wise. So, and I think that's part of the whole, I made myself, I did this, I did that. Yeah, under the sun, there's still no value in it. He says, in verse 10, whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. So I looked at anything I wanted to. I looked in every direction I wanted to. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure. So I didn't hold back on anything, indulged in everything. For my heart rejoiced in all my labor. So in all of that, he's able to look back and say, hey, this is good, right? I look at what I built, look at what I planted, look at all of that I developed, look at how my household has grown. I said, and this was my reward for my labor. It was good. I looked at it and said, hey, this is good, right? My heart rejoiced. It says, then I looked on all the works that my hands had done, and on the labor which I had toiled, in which I had toiled, and indeed all was vanity and grasping for the wind. There was no profit under the sun. So he looks first and says, look at everything. This is pretty good. Feeling pretty good about myself. Day 2, he gets up and looks around and says, now what? Okay. There's always satisfaction when you're doing the task, when you're doing the experiment, when you're accomplishing things. In the process, there's some satisfaction in that. But when it's done, when the experiment's done, when the experience is done, when the process is done, now what? I can only be satisfied with that. I'm only going to be happy with what I accomplished and what I did, even if it's a great example of a high level of craftsmanship and know-how, and I can only be satisfied in that for so long. And then I got to find something else. And I can look back at that stuff, but if I look back, I'm always looking back. I'm never looking forward. What's in front of me? What am I going to do next? What can I do next? And when you're looking for satisfaction in what you've done, that satisfaction runs out. That's why he says there's no profit. So indeed, it's vanity and grasping at the wind. It's trying to hold on to the vapor, right? It's just slipping out of my hands. And not only that, eventually it's going to be gone anyways. Eventually the palaces are going to fall down. The trees are going to be too old and quit producing, and you're going to have to cut them down and burn them up and try to replace them with new ones. You're going to, if you don't prune the vineyard, it's going to overgrow and it's not going to produce anything. But it's all going in his lifetime, and we talked about this last week. Basically, he said one generation's replacing the next. Right? One generation dies, another one's born. And the next generation doesn't care about who you were or what you did. They're going to do it better. They're going to do it bigger. Or they're going to do it like it's the first time it's ever been done, and they're going to forget about you. They're not going to do it the way you did it. They don't want to do it the way you did it, or they don't even know who you are, and they think they have an original idea. And that's kind of part of his underlying message here too. There's really nothing new, right? That's one of the phrases. There's nothing new under the sun. Yeah, our ideas are the same ideas that he's done. I can think of a couple of different. I like to follow the homesteaders on the YouTube channels and watch their little videos and stuff, and the things they do to improve their properties and to water their animals and feed their animals. I'm reading this and I'm going, their ideas aren't new. When they take people and tour the farm and they show them what they do, people are going, oh wow, I never thought about this. This is great. I'm like, yeah, but somebody else thought about it before he did. It's not a new idea. You go back to Solomon at least. We just read it. Gathered water, created water. I did things to be able to water my crops. There's nothing new. It's the same thing over and over again. Even now, we think, and somebody else pointed this out. I think it was David Guzik I was listening to earlier this morning. He said, technology makes us think that we have all kinds of new stuff. Because every so often, you got to have a new phone. You got to have new updates. You got to have new programs. Because it's all new. Well, it's not all new. It's to keep you doing the things you used to do with your hands on a little screen. It's not really anything new. It's a different way, maybe. But, a farmer who goes out and turns on his irrigation by hand isn't really any different than the guy who can sit in his house and punch it up with his telephone and his Wi-Fi or whatever he does, to remotely do it. You know, if you can remote start your car from inside this building so it's warm when we go out tonight, you haven't done anything more than what I do if I go out there and stick a key in and turn it. You just did it a different way. This is not really new. The idea is to start your car. So, anyways, I'm rambling again. It's all vanity, though, right? You take a step back, you look, and you're like, all right, it's done. Now what? And if you really want to get depressed, think about what's coming after this. Someday somebody else is going to plow your ground, or somebody else is going to tear down your house and build up another one, or whatever. You're not creating anything. First of all, you're not creating anything the way God does, right? We're not doing the bara thing. We're not creating something out of nothing. We've been given the things to be able to make things out of our limited ability to create. We're creating out of the things that God has given us to do, including the wisdom to be able to do it. Anyways, let's move on. We're not even going to get done with chapter 2 if I don't hurry up. Verse 12. Then I turned myself to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do who succeeds the king? Only what he has already done. I've already kind of touched on that, right? The next guy isn't going to do anything more than you did. I mean, he may take what you did, tear it down, and rebuild it, but he's going to do the same thing that you did. So what you've done is not going to last. What he's done is not going to be anything new, anything different than what you did. And what he's done, what he does, is not going to last either. Verse 13 says, Then I saw that wisdom excels folly as light excels darkness. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. Yet I perceived that the same event happens to them all. And so wisdom excels folly and foolishness. And we saw a lot of that in Proverbs, as Solomon explained that, the wise person prepares, the wise person, all the things that wisdom brings, while the fool ends up being the lazy guy who doesn't prepare for anything, doesn't look ahead, doesn't think, doesn't want to do, just wants to have. And he's saying, the wise person is always going to be ready for the next thing. Hopefully, he can look ahead, he can perceive, he can kind of anticipate what might happen. Where the fool just walks in darkness all the time. He just kind of takes it as it comes and trips over whatever. If he does anything good, it's because he accidentally stepped in it. He's not doing anything of wisdom, and yet he says, "Yet I myself perceived that the same event happens to them all." What's the same thing that happens to a wise person and a foolish person? In the end, they both die. It's the same event waiting for all of them, waiting for all of us. The Bible tells us it's appointed once for a man to die, and then the judgment. So we all have an appointment with that. It doesn't matter who we are. It doesn't matter how great we are. It doesn't matter how many people look up to us or how many people look down on us. In the end, it's all, everybody's taking the dirt bath, right? I mean, you're all going to end up somewhere in a hole, and that's this body. And then, but from here, it's you face God for the judgment. And verse 15 says, So I said in my heart, as it happens to the fool, so also it happens to me. And why was I then more wise? Then I said in my heart, this also is vanity. For there is no more remembrance of the wise than for the fool forever. Since all that now is will be forgotten in the days to come, and how does the wise man die as a fool? Now, Solomon, from his perspective, where he's at, is looking ahead and saying, nobody's going to remember me anyways. Give it a generation or two, and I'm just some king that used to be. And in a way, that's true. But look how many generations we are away, and we still remember Solomon. But that's for people who are willing to look back and are wise enough to look back and learn from the past. And we want to forget the past. We want to cut out the past and just think we're plowing ahead in some new path and we're going in a different direction, a whole new direction. And we're going to do everything different than the generations before. That's foolishness. But he says, and he's being honest with himself. There's no more remembrance for the wise than for the fool forever. Even Jesus, even God, the world purposely is forgetting. To the point where we have generations in our country, in our community, that know nothing at all about Jesus. They've not heard one thing out of the Bible. That's hard for me to fathom, but I've run into two people. Two 20-somethings in the last 20 years. And they knew absolutely nothing about the Bible, about Jesus, never heard a story one. Now, how do you celebrate Christmas every year? And even still today, as unpopular as it might be, there are still nativity scenes all over the place. The stores even still sell them. How do you not know anything at all? How have we gotten to a point where that's just some kind of lawn decoration? Or just something that sits on grandma's table, but we don't know anything at all about it? Except for that, the generations before, little by little, have moved away from God, have purposely left out God, and now we have churches that don't even want to teach about Jesus. Just teach like he was just some guru, some man, but they still want to call themselves Christians and still want to call themselves churches. They don't know his word. And the same people who have never heard a single Bible story will still use his name in a curse. Because they don't know any better. They don't even know what the name is. They don't know who was attached to the name, where it came from, or anything. They don't know. That's in our culture. That's in our community. And we still have many, many churches around. They still don't know. They just don't know. They don't hear it anymore. And so, even God's been forgotten. He won't be for long. He's not been forgotten by everybody. There are those of us who refuse to forget, who hang on to his word, and get in it and study it and whatnot. But, it's amazing to me how far from God we've gotten. And yet, if you know his word, we knew that was going to happen. Verse 17, therefore I hated life because the work that was done under the sun was distressing to me, for all is vanity and grasping at the wind. So, I hated life. Here I thought I was making a mark. Here I thought I was making a statement, and realized, it's not going any farther than me anyways. So what's the point? And that's what I was talking about before with the mentality of suicide in that. Verse 18, then I hated my labor in which I had toiled under the sun, because I must leave it to the man who comes after me. Hey, I'm not taking it with me. This isn't following me into forever. It's going to be here, and whoever comes after me, it's going to him. Verse 19, and who knows whether he will be wise or a fool? Yet he will rule over all my labor in which I toiled, and in which I have shown myself wise under the sun. This is vanity. Right? It's useless. And his own son took 1 week to divide the kingdom. All that Solomon did, all that he set up, all the peace with enemies, everything, all of his wisdom, the writings he left behind, everything. Rehoboam took 1 week to destroy it all. I mean, we've been complaining because it took less than a year for us to go from energy independent to dependent on other countries. It took Rehoboam 1 week to divide the whole kingdom into 2 kingdoms. So you have at that point, 1 week after Solomon dies, you have the 10 tribes to the north and you have Judah and Benjamin to the south. In 1 week. Because you don't want to listen to, you don't want to learn from the past. From those who established what you now have. And listen, that's a big thing in our nation right now. We want to break off from our past. We want to break off from our founders. We don't want to know the words they said. We don't want to remember who they were. We don't teach the children to remember the past or what they did or how they fought to keep what was established. And we keep telling them, you keep telling this next generation, listen, you're not going to have any freedom. There's not going to be any freedoms at all. Oh, no, your rules and your regulations. No, I want fewer regulations for you. Right? The Constitution, go by that. That's where your freedoms are. Our freedoms for our country are in there. And they're God-given according to that document. Our forefathers recognized that. And yeah, you're going to have freedom, you're going to have responsibility. If you want to maintain that freedom, you have responsibility to protect it, to live in it, and to not give it up. If you give it up, it's just going to get worse generation after generation. Don't think so? Look at the history of Russia, of China, of, other nations like that. Look at how they're treating their people now. Look at how they treat the people in their nation. And then understand that what's coming down from our leaders is they want the same thing these other countries have. They want all the power. They want you to have no freedom. If they can take away your freedom, you don't have any power. And that's what this nation was established on. They're supposed to represent the people. They're not supposed to be there for their own gain. Ooh. All right. Somehow I made this political. But that's what he's saying here. Who knows, right? Who knows whether the next person that comes is going to rule over this. He might be wise or he might be a fool. And yet he's gonna rule over all of my life, everything I've done. He's going to rule over that. It's all vanity. Now, listen, we got to remind ourselves, this is not, it's all vanity, so don't do it. Right? Because we could do that. We could say that now. We could say, hey, you know what? They're going to destroy this country anyways, no matter what I do. When I'm gone, so what's the point? Why bother? That's not what Solomon is saying. Why bother? If that is your life's mission, period, and there is no God involved, there's no reason to pursue righteousness, then yeah, it's not going to matter when you're gone. But if you're going to leave behind history, and you're going to leave behind, if you go through this life, living in relationship with God, living to set an example of what righteousness is and what that life is, you don't know what you're leaving behind for the next person. You don't know who you're affecting for the next generation, who's watching you now. And who knows whether just a few people willing to stand up, willing to walk according to the Word of God and live out your relationship with Him and stand for freedom and not bondage, who knows whether you're not going to inspire another person in the next generation, and that it doesn't gain momentum going the other way. I know. Glenn, you talk about Bible prophecy and you keep saying we're near the end and we're in the last days. And I know. I believe that. Everything that I see is pointing toward that. However, if God decides to wait another 100 years, another 50 years, another 150 years, I want my grandkids and my great-grandkids to live with some freedom that I had. And so I want to inspire them to not let anybody take that away from them. But to stand for it, but also to stand for it by living a godly life. And that first and foremost. Because when God sets you free, it doesn't matter what kind of government, tyrannical government you live under, you're still free. And that's why, in their minds, they must put down Christianity. However, they've not been able to do it in 2,000 years. And they're not going to do it now. So, anyways. Verse 20, therefore I turned my heart and despaired of all the labor in which I had toiled under the sun. Remember, he's trying to do this without God. He's contemplating all that he's done without God. For there is a man whose labor is with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, yet he must leave his heritage to a man who has not labored for it. This also is vanity and great evil. And there again, you're talking about, you want to apply that to our nation and our freedoms. What we have now, we didn't earn. It's been handed down to us. We've inherited it. We're like a bunch of rich kids who inherited grandpa's money, and we don't know what to do with it. And so we're just going to throw it all away. And we're going to not live in reality, and we're not going to go to work, and we're not going to. That's what we're doing with our freedom in this country. We're literally throwing it away. And so he must leave his heritage to a man who has not labored for it. This also is vanity and great evil. For what has man for all his labor and for the striving of his heart with which he has toiled under the sun? Right? If it's just your efforts put into it, what good is it? For all his days are sorrowful, and his work is burdensome. Even in the night, his heart takes no rest. This also is vanity. Right? So, in your labor, in your work, in your planning, you run into some troubles. That's why there has to be wisdom involved, right? You got to figure out how to get around the problems and how to work on the problems. So even at night, you might lay awake at night trying to figure out, how am I going to fix this? How am I going to get past this to get where I want to go? Right? So you even lose some sleep at night, and he's saying this is all vanity. It's all, you can't catch it. It never stops. It never stays. There's nothing to it. It says, for who can eat and who can enjoy, or who can have enjoyment more than I? Right? Who can eat more? Who can have more enjoyment than me? The richest man and the smartest man, who can do this better than me? And yet, he has nothing, except for, that question goes with the conclusion. For God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy to, see the joy part. Don't forget that. It's not just wisdom and knowledge. Without God, it's just wisdom and knowledge. It's just experience. But with God, wisdom and knowledge and joy to a man who is good in his sight, but to the sinner he gives the work of gathering and collecting, that he may give him, or that he may give to him who is good before God. This also is vanity and grasping for the wind. So God gives the wisdom and the knowledge and the joy to a man who is good in his sight. So you're going to walk in the sight of the Lord. You're going to walk in the ways of the Lord. Then the good that you have. And again, it depends on what you see as good. Is the good that you have just material wealth? Or is it really, like this time of year, my grandkids at the house often. And, I've got 4 that can run wild and 2 now who are little babies and don't go anywhere unless we carry them. But, I look at that and I'm like, yeah, man, I'm pretty rich. I'm pretty wealthy. I can have them, and they'll all still come to the house. And they like each other enough that they'll all come to the house at the same time. So, I think I'm doing pretty good comparatively speaking to other people. You can have all the money in the world and a great business mind and a great working business. If you sit in your house alone at night and you don't know God, there are a lot of people who sit in their house alone who know the Lord. And so they're not really alone, and they know that. And they know that this is not this present time. This walking through the world is not their end. It's what they do now for the Lord. And their hope and their future is really yet to come. And they know that nothing on this earth is going to satisfy. We won't be fully satisfied until we're in the presence of Jesus. And then there's no end to that satisfaction. We're talking about no satisfaction in anything under the sun without God. There's no satisfaction, no complete satisfaction that sooner or later you're going to get to the end. And you're going to look back and say, wow, that's really cool, look what I did, and now what? So it's been, I'm really glad to be teaching this book, because to just read it and to just listen to little blips of people or sermons and here and there, really had kind of gives you a slanted idea of what this book is written for and why it's here. It really is, and I think it was really Solomon's intention not to say, see, even a great king can be depressed, but it was Solomon's intention to say, look, none of this matters without the Lord. I've tried. I've tested it. I did all these things without worrying about honoring God. Just did them for myself, and I accomplished it, but it didn't bring any satisfaction without Him. Nothing is good under the sun. Let's pray. Lord, thank you again for your word and for this encouragement. Almost sounds weird to even say that, but the encouragement from this book, the wisdom of Solomon again to give us direction, to help us to see where we're supposed to go, to have the right attitude and how we're supposed to look at things. Lord, even in the New Testament it says, do everything as unto the Lord. Lord, our whole life should be to worship you, not just when we sing on Sunday morning, but being in your word, the work that we do, the way we influence people, all of that should be done to honor you and to bring glory and honor to you. And so, Lord, use this book to correct our attitudes and to inspire us, Lord, to be able to talk to other people and to share your word and share the gospel with others. Lord, we thank you for all that you've done. Lord, keep us safe tonight as we head home. In Jesus' name, amen.